Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is someone I admire greatly, Dr. Henry Mintzberg. I'll tell you all about him in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that LinkedIn Live show that we focus on what's often called the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment that we exact toward, that we show toward others. And when you do it from a leadership perspective, you do it to bring people together for common cause, and leaders energize the organization. So welcome, Dr. Henry Mintzberg. It is an honor to have you on the show today. Thank you. So
it's an honor to be on the show, John. Thank you.
All right. Henry, as you asked me to call you, is a writer and educator, mostly about management organizations, developing managers. And he has a new topic he's exploring about rebalancing society, which we will explore. He holds the Cleghorn Chair of Management Studies at the Faculty of Management at McGill in Toronto. Not Toronto, Montreal. That's about the worst thing I could possibly say.
You got to be very careful. We beat them last year in the playoffs, mind you.
Shame on me. Anyway, McGill. It's in Montreal. I knew that. Anyway,
the beauty of Toronto is the road back to Montreal.
Okay, all right. So McGill, and you have written over 20 books, and you've had 21 honorary degrees, and you are also Order of Merit in Canada, and you have co-founded many international management programs for managers, for business, healthcare, and your new site is Coaching Ourselves, which is a self-coaching site. Very exciting, and that's it. So Henry, welcome to Grace Under Pressure. So
thank you.
Right. I want to give people a little bit of a background before we jump in the background and to jump into what you're doing right now. But in 2004, you published a book called Managers, Not MBAs. Your thesis was that practice management may be more effective than academic management. So have you seen that take place in the 16, 17 years since you wrote that? So
mostly no. There's been some take up, and there are some schools and a number of managers have bought into the idea. Business schools are making too much money doing what they're doing, which is pretending that they're training managers. But you don't train a manager in a classroom. What you can do is take people who are managers and help them to reflect on their experience and learn from it. So we've created programs where people typically in their 40s or so do that. But to take a 22-year-old and pretend they're learning management, or even a 40-year-old and then do exactly what you do with a 22-year-old with cases and so on, just doesn't make sense. But schools are making a lot of money. People are going into finance. They're very good at teaching finance and marketing and so on. So people are getting good jobs in finance and marketing. In management, as CEOs, MBAs do worse than non-MBAs.
Interesting. So I've always kind of thought, just sideward, of management, MBA. My son is an MBA. My wife is an MBA, and both are very accomplished, far more accomplished than I am. But management, it's like a trade school. Learning the trade of management? Do you have a thought on that? So
I wouldn't use the word trade. I'd use the word craft, which is similar, but has a different sense. It's kind of like apprenticeship. In a way, I mean, we don't go through it the way medicine or accounting goes through it, but essentially you learn it on the job and hopefully from a mentor who knows what he or she is doing. And then you can pick up enormously useful things in our IMPM or IMHL programs, healthcare, one for business, one for healthcare. You can pick up enormous things by reflecting on your experience and discussing it with other people who have experience.
You know, I like your use of management as a craft. I actually wrote an article about that once, and it really is. And so often when we talk about management, we slide into leadership or vice versa. And I just do exercises. Does anybody in this room want to be a manager? No one raises his or her hand. But if you say, do you want to be a leader? Every hand goes up. So it's that. But you cannot lead effectively, I believe, and I would like to get your opinion, unless you're an effective manager. Would you agree, Henry? So
yeah, absolutely. Leadership without management is disconnected, and management without leadership is boring and disconcerting. You need both, and not as separate activities, integrated. Sure, there's a leadership dimension of encouraging people and building culture and all those nice things, but management is about rolling up your sleeves and getting on the ground and finding out what's going on. Nothing stopped leaders from doing it, but that's not the image. Once we have an EMBA program separate from our other program, but designed after this kind of reflection on experience. And 1 year, a sort of rah-rah marketing guy was part of the group meeting the new class, and he said, "Who's a leader in this class?" And about 4 hands went up, and I thought, those guys aren't leaders. You don't designate yourself a leader. People designate you a leader. They're the worst of it. You should have said, "Who's a narcissist?" and keep those hands up.
Oh, that's great. Well, one of the reasons I like your work so much is that you're kind of an iconoclast and you have a wonderful sense of humor. And I want to show that right now, because this is a graphic from a few years ago, but add to the string, excuse me. And it's, describe your manager's job, which is in 3 things: very logical, interpersonal, informational, and decision-making. And the interpersonal are, I liked how you said there's leader and liaison, but then you use the word figurehead. So I haven't seen that in a management text. Where did you come up with the word figurehead for that?
Well, I came up with it directly through my empirical research, because this framework is based on observing 5 chief executives, all in the United States, one running a school board named Charlie Brown, by the way, one running a major hospital, and 3 running major companies. And when you watch, say, the head of Bulova Watch Company, who was one of them, I don't remember if that was a specific case, but presenting a gold watch to a retiring employee, how do you describe that? I mean, basically, I went in their offices, was a fly on the wall for a week, wrote down everything they did, and then tried to explain it. So how do you explain a chief executive presenting a retiring employee with a gold watch? I thought figurehead. He's the official head of the organization, so he engages in the ceremony. I mean, the Queen, who doesn't manage England, I guess she manages Buckingham Palace, but she doesn't manage England, engages an enormous amount of that activity. Right. But everyone does. Even
and it's a thing we can poke fun at, but I think it's I might use the word statesman, but leaders need to know how to act the role of that and make, when you're giving that gold watch or recognition, whatever it is, put yourself into it, not act wooden like a figurehead, but invest yourself in that. Would you agree? So
yeah. What's his name? What's the name of the comedian who lived to be Gracie Field's husband? I'm trying to remember.
Oh, George Burns. George Burns.
He said that authenticity is everything. If you can fake that, you can fake anything.
That's great. I love George Burns. Wonderful.
So they have to feel, it has to be authentic. But really good leaders kind of get a kick out of doing it. They feel deeply about the organization, they feel deeply about the person, and they enjoy doing it.
Great. And one more moment on this model, because I like this. When you under the decision roles, you called disturbance. What was that? Disturbance handler.
Disturbance handler. Yeah, it's a bit of an awkward
great
phrase.
Word.
Yeah, crisis handler, disturbance handler. Yeah, when something goes wrong and everybody's passing the buck, guess where it ends up?
Yeah. But it's great. Your work brings things to life. So, and also you have something called the stratton strategy, the 5 Ps. That's been foundational in. You've been somewhat critical of strategic planning consultancy. Why is that, Henry?
Well, it's not the consultancy necessarily. It's strategic planning. I wrote a book that ended up calling it an oxymoron. You don't plan strategy, you learn strategy. I maintain that nobody in the history of the earth has ever planned strategy through a set of analytic techniques, which is a quote almost literally from Michael Porter in his book, that I favor a set of analytical techniques for creating strategy. And I say nobody's ever created a strategy through an analytical technique, because strategy is synthesis. It's not analysis. Of course, do analysis. Of course, it's good to know your competitors and all that. But it's about synthesis, and synthesis comes through a learning process. I call it emergent strategy rather than deliberate strategy. And an article in the HBR Harvard Business Review called Crafting Strategy, which is step by step, you learn your way to a strategy. You don't just sit in an office and bang, create a strategy.
Oh, well, people do, but it doesn't work. And so,
Yeah,
but anyway,
that's right. And then you blame implementation.
Correct.
And
Well,
then by the way, let me just say, and the reason you blame implementation is because you're the formulator. So those dumbbells weren't smart enough to implement your brilliant strategy. And if the dumbbells were smart, they would say, well, if you're so smart, why didn't you create a strategy that we dumbbells were capable of implementing? In other words, if it fails in implementation, it fails in formulation, because it wasn't formulated to be implementable by the people who had to do that.
Well, I like that, and the first word that came to you when I talked about strategy was learning, and so you have a concept of social learning. Why is social learning so important in organizations?
Well, because the option to social learning is individual learning, and it's fine. I mean, people will watch this individually; they'll read books. That's fine. But especially in organizations, which are social instruments, where people have to learn, but they also have to share their learning and reinforce their learning and learn much more by interacting with each other. It's a natural for management development. It should be built on social learning, not on individual learning. Well, go look at Harvard, and they're all sitting in their case classes, and everybody is trying to impress the professor with some pithy point because they read 10 pages on a company they never heard of the night before. Well, that's no way to train managers.
That's good. Well, you are taking this to a new sphere and going from management to business to management to our planet, and rebalancing society. So you have something called the Declaration of Interdependence. What does that mean? I'm going to bring it up on screen here. So.
Yeah, it's at the bottom, but you can also, there's also another graphic you could use. We didn't think to bring it in on page 3. But it reads near the beginning. Well, another one that you may have heard of reads as follows: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So we start the declaration of our interdependence with, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created dependent on each other, our earth, and its climate. And then we go on. So that gives you an idea of the comparison. The American Declaration of Independence, which was an amazing document in terms of its impact, declared individualism, celebrated individualism. And we're trying to celebrate not only individual needs, but collective needs in government and community needs in communities, communal needs in communities, and healthy societies balance those three. So the Declaration is about achieving that balance, which is what we need today, not what the American 13 states needed necessarily in 1789, but it is what we need today.
Right. And we have on our graphic, the next step from declaring our interdependence is reverse and renew. What do you mean by that, Henry?
Well, I wrote this book called Rebalancing Society. And if you look on the top, on the circle on the top, rebalancing public, private, and plural sectors. We only talk about public and private sectors, and we have pendulum politics that swings between left that favors government and public, and right that favors business and private, and we have pendulum politics, or else we get stuck right in the middle. And many countries, including the US, going back and forth, and many others, engage in this pendulum politics. Well, as you can't balance a stool on one leg, whether it's capitalism or communism or populism, you can't balance a stool on two legs, left and right, business and government, because you need a third leg, and the third leg is community. And community is all those things we do that are neither government nor business. And think about it. I teach at a university that's not owned by government. It's not owned by private investors. It's not owned by anybody. It's a non-owned organization. Some people shop at co-ops. Those are owned by members. They're not owned by investors. Greenpeace is not public and not private. It's plural. It's a non-owned organization where we have huge numbers of those things, but they're kind of lost in this whole debate between public and private. So I published Rebalancing Society about that, and the first thing that came from someone who read it was a manager, had been in both business and the plural sector, and she said, what can I do? And I thought, oh, I kind of covered that, no? And so,
I already did.
kept coming up with answers. What can I do? And everybody kept saying, yeah, but what could I do? No matter what I said, I could say be Greta and go out and complain to the Swedish parliament. I don't know. And whatever I said, they said, yeah, but what could I do? So I created this table, which is also in that site, rebalancingsociety.org, on the 4th page. And it's got 15 dots, and you find yourself either, what can I do? What can we do in our communities? What can we do in our businesses? What can we do in our governments? And what can we do to reframe how we see the world, or renew what's wrong, or reverse what's wrong, or renew what's right? So you click on the dot, and you get suggestions, about 35 suggestions in those 15 dots. So that's what I mean by the second step there. But the trouble is, we have enormous numbers of initiatives and activities and programs and stuff going in the plural sector. I mean, think about it. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. There's more kind of, improvement projects going on, whether it's climate change or whatever it is, than ever. And yet the problem of imbalance in favor of private sector interests, as I see it, keeps getting worse. And I think a main reason is that the private sector has this incredible ability to consolidate their efforts. If Shell and Exxon and all the others are fighting with each other on the street corners, they're cooperating with each other at Davos, or when they need new taxes or whatever it is, lower taxes or whatever. The plural sector can't get its collective act together. There's so many things going on, but they're all over the place. And there's this need to consolidate. There's this need to consolidate their actions. So that's what the orange is.
Great. So you've been very explicit about what can I do, and I've been to that site, and we'll put it in the notes where the action steps. So when we talk about consolidating actions, what's the first step? How do we do it?
Well, that's where the declaration comes in, I think. Okay. And you used the term, interestingly enough, when we began, which is common cause. And I have the same exact feeling that if we realize the common cause, income disparities, okay, why do we have income disparities? I think it's fair, most people would agree, that it's the tilting in favor of private sector interests that brings on disparities. Well, what about climate change? Well, I would argue it's also the tilting toward private sector interests, because the oil companies, for example, have enormous lobbies to stop action on climate change, and so we get this joke of 4-year governments making 40-year plans for climate change, and thank you very much, they're gone in 4 years. Yeah. Obama comes up with a plan, and out goes the window, and Trump comes along, and Biden brings it back, and who knows what's going to follow. We don't need plans. We're back to planning. We don't need plans for climate change. We need action, and we need action to rebalance society, the fundamental issue. It goes back to the fall of communism with the Berlin Wall and the conclusion that capitalism had triumphed, and it was wrong. Balance had triumphed. Back then, the communist regimes were totally out of balance on the side of their governments. And the successful countries in the West, and the ones that remain successful, balance public, private, and plural. Okay,
Right.
and we need to get back to that balance, and so we need action in that regard now, not planning, acting. I mean, climate change is not going to wait for decade-long plans.
I just thought of something in the term of your history. I know from the bio sketch that you became started teach or got your PhD in 1968. Am I correct on that? So
Yeah.
that was a time of great youthful upheaval and
sure.
time. So teaching for all those years, how are students then, which would have been my generation, compared to now? Do you see any similarities, or are we different? What?
Well, you know, I got my PhD at the MIT Sloan School of Management. They were not exactly flaming radicals
No.
in that department, maybe let alone MIT, I don't know, but certainly not in that department. The biggest change you would see is we had 2 women in that class, I think. And now you'd see a lot of women. I can't talk for what MIT has done since I've been there, but most business schools still, they make a lot of noise. They make all kinds of hype. You know, Harvard's still teaching cases. Everybody else still teaching theory. I don't think they get it about what management is and what's needed.
Well, we're getting into the time of dynamic balance, which is really, I mean, it's a life force. I mean, it makes sense because one cannot physically live out of balance. So why should organizations or cultures do the same? Would you?
Yeah, absolutely. And the globe is out of balance because globalization really means economic globalization. Look, let me be clear. I love business. I love business. I love my car. I like the food I eat in restaurants. I love business in its place, which is the marketplace. Stay out of my government.
Yeah.
Stay out of my government. You're a CEO of a company. You're a citizen like me. You can do it as you like. But as the CEO of the company and with your money, you have absolutely no business interfering with our government.
Well, you are probably well aware, I think it was October 2019, the Business Roundtable in the U.S. issued a new proclamation about redefining what stakeholder value meant. Do you recall that? And did it resonate at all with you? Because it seemed to be they're kind of addressing societal concerns. So
I recall it vividly, and it resonated with me totally in a negative way. I do a blog called Mintzberg, called Mintzberg.org/blog. At least it's accessible there. And it's I did one on that business roundtable because there were 4 declarations. Okay. Let's start with the previous one, 2019. Read the one in 2012. It said exactly the same thing. They said exactly the same thing about shareholders and stakeholders. What happened between 2012 and 2019? Why'd they have to reissue the same statement 7 years later? Going back earlier, way back, the statement was business exists for everybody. Then Jack Welch came along and promoted what he really referred to later as the dumbest idea ever, which was shareholder value. But Jack Welch championed the statement from the Business Roundtable that said business exists only for the shareholders, not for the stakeholders, in so many words. Okay, and the reason they gave was it would be too complicated for managers to be able to reconcile all these differences. Well, suddenly managers became impossible to reconcile differences. It's a bit laughable, right? I'm a manager, chief exec. How can I possibly reconcile this? Well, you certainly can. So that was the second one. Then they came back with the 2012 and said, oh, we made a mistake. It's really about shareholders and stakeholders. Thank you very much. And then they came back in 2019, said exactly the same thing again, having done nothing in the interim. Right. The whole thing is pure hypocrisy.
Okay, well, that's why I like you. Kind of your whole practice and what you do. You're an iconoclast, and you're, if I may use the word, and sometimes you're a Bolshevik in the business world. May I say that? So.
Well, depends what you mean by a Bolshevik.
Turning
I'm
things
left.
over.
I'm not very left.
Yeah.
I'm always
I
right,
didn't
but I'm never. But I'm somewhat left. I'm sort of
over,
moderate left.
overturning the status quo, I would say, challenging
Well,
assumptions.
overturning nonsense, overturning imbalance. There's lots of status quo I'm perfectly happy about. But the status quo of power in the world today, yes, absolutely. It's out of balance. And it's not about attacking business. It's not a Bolshevik that way. It's not about attacking business. It's about putting business in its place, which is the marketplace. That's where business is. So, the Supreme Court and Citizens United legalized bribery. I mean, that's precisely what the Supreme Court of the United States did. They legalized bribery. They opened the floodgates to private donations, and they just are in the process. That is in the process of destroying American democracy, and it's no less than that. They have been destroying American democracy.
Well, there's a lot of people in my country that would agree with you on that. So, but talking about talking about perception of government, there's the concept it exists both in business and, of course, in government, and that's the concept of good governance. Have we lost perspective of that, Henry?
Well, it depends who we are.
Not our Canadian, not our friends.
I think, despite recent questions, I don't think Biden is bad governance. We won't talk about Trump. Trump is off any scale, and I don't think it's a question of left or right. I don't see how you can be a thoughtful conservative and believe in Trump. But then if you go to Denmark, terrific, good governance. If you go to Germany, I think Merkel is stepping down now. I think Merkel was the epitome of good governance. I think Canada's okay, not bad. So there are countries that are doing fine.
Right, and I think that what I was trying to dig at it, is when we forget that. I mean, governance is this. Thoughtful running and operations, but having a decent perspective and making things work, help bringing people together for consensus and making things work. And I think we kind of lose that in our special interests. Would you have a comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I say, I've been implying throughout this discussion, America is individualism run rampant. Okay. Individualism is great. I'm pretty individualistic. I write books all by myself. You write books. You know about that. It's the most individualistic thing you can imagine. Sometimes you co-author, but usually you spend months or years doing your own book. So I'm a great believer in individualism, but not to the exclusion of collective needs that governments supply and so on. You get the extreme right and ask them if we should get rid of the police force. Obviously, the police force is harassing them, so they'd probably say yes. But we'd end up with chaos. This is what we end up with in the globe. Imagine a town with weak government and no police. Okay, just imagine your town, any town, with weak government and no police. The thugs would take over. That's our global village today. The thugs have taken over. Whether it's whoever wants to control what. So China or Russia or America's had no shortage of things it should have stayed out of, like Vietnam and so on. So.
Great. Well, we're racing toward our end. We could go on and on, but I want to bring it to a close. And I always ask every guest, and the question is coming. Henry, do you have a story about grace that you wish to share with us?
Well, when I was a young man dating, I never took out anybody named Grace. So I don't know if I can give any stories about Grace. I could tell you stories about other women, but I can't tell you stories about Grace.
That's good. Love it.
Yeah. So when I saw the question, I thought, that's a very interesting question. I don't have a clue how I'm going to answer that. Maybe Grace under pressure. Maybe I haven't been under enough pressure to feel that. But I actually have a story.
I would prompt you here, and What you're doing at Grace is that catalyst for the greater good. And what you are doing with Rebalancing Society and the effort in there, that is an act of grace. And you're permitting others to join in and do it. So with your prompt, I'm going to say that's a story of grace. So
I appreciate that. And I don't think it's grace under pressure, except the pressure we all feel for what's going on. But it's certainly, I don't know if it's certainly, but I accept that that's grace. But let me tell you a little story. I was giving a lecture at Wharton many years ago in the business school, and suddenly I seized up. I lost my train of thought. I lost where I was going. I just froze, and I felt so embarrassed. And immediately somebody put up his hand and asked a question, and then the conversation went on beautifully with questions and discussion. And I was so forever indebted to them and that person, but all of them, they all came up to me, so many, and said, look, it's happened to me. Don't be embarrassed about it. And they were, I thought that was grace on their part.
No question.
The speaker frozen, and they were so lovely about how they dealt with it.
Well, that's the power of grace. It is both, transactional, as that in that one moment, a moment in time, and then I would expand it to the great transformational effort that you are so engaged in too. So it works on many levels. And Henry, it's been a pleasure to have you. How can people find you? We'll put these in the notes. But if is it Mintzberg.org? Is that
Mintzberg.org is my main website. Rebalancing Society.org is really the website that people can go through in just a short time to get the essence of it and then spend more time. The blog, as I said, is mintzberg.org/blog. But you can see that on mintzberg.org.
Henry, with that, we're going to close out. And I say thank you, sir. It's an honor. So
thank you, John. It's been an honor. Beautiful.